There was a boy named Hollis on a hill farm above Cookeville, Tennessee. In the winter he was 11. In 1955, his father came in from the woodlot with 2 fingers crushed flat under a road log. The nearest doctor was 20 miles down a gravel grade in the dark. Hollis backed the stake truck out of the barn, worked the clutch and the column shift he was barely tall enough to reach, and drove his father down that mountain in second gear with the headlights swimming on the wet gravel. He had him at the doctor's door before the bleeding stopped, and he was home and asleep by midnight. Here is the part that ought to stop you. Nobody on that road thought it was a story. A boy of 11 driving a hurt man to town was a Tuesday, and his mother thanked him about the way you thank a child for bringing in the milk. Before he was 12, Hollis could do 30 things that most grown men today would have to look up. So could I, more or less, and so could nearly every boy on that road. We were not gifted, we were needed, and a needed boy learns fast. Then the world quit needing a boy's hands, and you can put a date on the hinge. By 1960, there was a television set in nearly every front room in this country, where 10 years before there had been almost none, and a boy's afternoon slowly stopped being something he filled with his hands. Number 28, you could hand a boy this afternoon, and he would have it by dark. Number 2 is the one that turned a boy into a man years before the calendar would agree, and it is the one I want you waiting for. Number 1 is not a skill at all. It is the thing the other 29 were only ever a way of reaching. These were never hobbies. A boy learned them because a house and a farm and a family had work in them that did not care how old you were. Number 30. He could make his own amusement out of a pocket knife and whatever was lying in the yard, a willow whistle in spring, a slingshot from a forked branch, and a strip of inner tube, a cup and ball off a stick, and a length of string. Before the set arrived in the front room, a bored boy was simply expected to go cure that himself, and the cure ran about 20 minutes and cost nothing. Number 29, fire. A boy could start one in one match in a wind and bank a stove at night so it still held a live coal at dawn. My job from about 8 on was the kitchen stove. The first morning I let it go cold, my father did not raise his voice. He just made me lay it and light it cold with the house at 40 degrees and everyone standing around waiting on the coffee, and I never let it go out again. Number 28, and this is the one I said you could hand a boy this afternoon and have done by dark. He could make change in his head and be trusted to do the family's business clear across town. A list, a few folded dollars, the names of 3 shopkeepers, and a boy that age came home with the right goods and the right coins. The grocer half counted on a sharp boy to catch a wrong figure, and now and then one did and got a nod for it he carried around all week like a medal. Number 27, knots that held under a load, a bowline that would not slip, a clove hitch around a post, a square lashing to make 2 poles act like one. He tied them in the dark by feel because a load that worked loose on the highway was a boy's fault and everyone would know exactly whose. He tested the next one on the hair of his own arm. Number 26, he could put an edge on a knife or an axe with nothing but a stone and a little spit and patience, draw it down until it shaved the hair off his forearm clean. A man meeting a boy would sometimes test the boy's pocket knife against his own thumbnail, and he would know in about a second how much care that boy had in him. A dull blade was not just useless, it was dangerous because it skipped instead of biting, and most boys carried a scar that had taught them the difference. Number 25, he kept his own bicycle running, patched the tube with a kit and a tin of rubber cement, found the leak by holding the tube under water in a bucket and watching for the bubbles, trued a bent wheel by ear, plinking the spokes one at a time until they all rang the same note. Mine was a hand-me-down with 1 fender and a coaster brake, and I knew every bearing in it. A boy and the machine he depended on, and not one adult anywhere in it. Number 24 and number 23 are not for the squeamish, and a boy did the first of them with a knife in a cold morning. He could clean a fish and dress out a rabbit for the pan, slit it, strip it, gut it, and have it ready for his mother's skillet without making a wreck of the kitchen. There was no mystery to a boy then about where supper came from. He had usually carried it home himself, still warm, and that was simply how a family on a thin budget got meat onto the table in the middle of the week. Number 23, he could split a winter's wood and stack it loose enough to dry, and more than that, he could look at a cord and tell you whether it would carry the house to spring. Any fool can swing a maul. Knowing how much was enough, and being right about it, was a warm February instead of a cold one, and a 10-year-old was expected to know it the way he knew his own name. You would think the next one too simple to bother putting on a list. The men who watched a boy botch it knew better. Number 22, he could drive a nail clean and saw to a line. Watch a grown man today bend 3 nails hanging a picture, and you will understand it was not nothing. The man who taught me was my uncle, a carpenter, and he had a hard rule. You measure a board twice, and you cut it once, and if you cut it twice, you have made firewood, and you can go split it. A boy learned because he was handed real work, a fence to mend, a porch step to replace, and a botched job meant doing it over while a man stood there watching. He learned fast to make the first cut the right one. Let me stop the count for a moment and ask you something plainly. Why could a boy of 11 do a dozen things a grown man now has to look up on his telephone? I will give you my answer, but first I want you to sit a second with the cost of it, because you are living inside the cost. You know the feeling. A young fellow at the hardware counter talks to you slow, like you are the one who would not follow, when you have forgotten more about that wall of fittings than he will ever learn. A grandson who cannot start a mower or tie a load down, who calls a man for every small thing and pays him for it. And underneath all of it, the quiet ache that the world has decided you are the one who is out of date when you are the last man in the room who can actually do any of this. So let me get back to the list and to one I owe you some honesty about. Number 21. He could sew a button back on and darn a sock so the heel held another season. Now here is where I owe these boys the truth. The romance of a child who could mend his own clothes is mostly something I added later, looking backward with soft eyes. He learned to darn because there was no money for new socks. A good half of what looks like competence to us now was just being poor and doing without and making a thing last because the only other choice was going without it entirely. I am not sorry we knew how. I am only saying we should not gild it. Some of this was the underside of having nothing. Number 20. He kept 1 pair of boots and kept them alive, greased the leather against the wet, knocked the mud off before it dried, and cracked the seams, set them near the stove, but never close enough to scorch, and on Sunday he put a shine on them. That is the part worth pausing on. A family could be flat broke, and the boys' 1 pair of shoes still went to church gleaming, because a shine cost nothing but 10 minutes and a rag, and it told the world that being poor and being shabby were 2 different things, and a man got to choose which one he was. Number 19 put meat on the table, and we handled it more carefully than anything else on this whole list. He could shoot straight with a .22 and clean it after. This was not sport, and it was not play. A boy who could reliably take a squirrel or a rabbit was adding real food to the supper pot, and he was taught the rifle the way you teach a child something that can kill, slow and serious, and with a cuff on the ear if he ever once let the muzzle wander toward a person. I got my first one at 10. My grandfather stood at my shoulder for the better part of a month before he would let me carry it out of his sight. What comes next is the one I opened this whole video with, and it is the one that still ought to stop a man cold. Number 18, he could harness a team and handle the truck or the tractor. This is the one I started with, so let me finish Hollis's part of it. He was not unusual up on that hill, and that is the staggering thing. Every boy his age could back a wagon, work a clutch, G and haw a mule team down a row without ever crossing the traces. They learned it the only way anybody ever learns it. Put up on the seat at 7 with a man's hard hand laid over theirs. At 9, driving with a man watching from the fence rail. At 11, alone, the way Hollis was alone the night his father's hand went under that log. Think for a second about what that asks of a boy. 2,000 pounds of animal or iron, a real road with a real drop off the shoulder, true consequence the whole way, and a child holding the lines. We did not call it confidence because we did not even have a word for it. A boy was simply expected to be equal to the thing in front of him, and so, most of the time, he turned out to be. The expecting did most of the work. We have stopped expecting much of boys at all, and then we stand around wondering where the men went. Number 17, he could put in a garden and help put the food up, set the rows straight with a string, thin the seedlings, hoe between them without chopping the plants off at the root, and come August stand at the stove next to his mother and grandmother canning tomatoes and beans against the winter. By the first frost, the cellar shelves were full of glass jars a boy had helped fill, and he ate out of them all winter, knowing which ones were his work. Nobody mistook a vegetable garden for a lifestyle. It was January supper, planted in May by hands that were mostly small ones. This one a boy built from nothing and kept for years. Number 16, he could build something real and make it last. A rabbit coop with a door that swung true, a sled that took the hill all winter without throwing a runner, a crystal radio wound from an oatmeal box, and a length of copper wire that pulled a station out of the empty air with no battery at all. I built that radio at 12 from a diagram in a magazine, and the first night a voice came out of a rock and a wire I had wound with my own fingers. I lay awake half the night just listening to it. A boy who has built one thing that works is never quite the same boy again. Number 15, he could swim a river and handle a rowboat. Every boy who grew up near water learned to read the current, ferry across at an angle, instead of fighting it straight and losing, bring a flat-bottomed boat into a dock without banging the nose. Water was not a supervised activity behind a fence with a lifeguard's whistle. It was the creek, the quarry, the river, and a boy learned its moods the hard way, or he did not learn them. Number 14, he could read the sky and the land. Smell the rain 2 hours out, tell by the slant of the light how much day was left to work in, find his way home across country he had crossed exactly once before. He carried the map in his head because there was no other map and no voice from a dashboard telling him where to turn. How many grown men do you know now who could walk out their own back door, go 3 miles into the woods, and come straight home without help? Number 13, he could solder a joint and bring a dead radio back to life. Heat the iron on the stove, tin the wire, make a joint that came out bright and solid instead of a cold gray lump that would quit in a month. My father could fix any radio in the neighborhood, and people carried them to our kitchen table wrapped in a dish towel. I learned it standing at his elbow, breathing the rosin smoke, not being taught exactly, just standing there long enough and handing him things. Nobody called it teaching. An elbow and a boy willing to stand at it was the entire arrangement. Stop the count with me one more time, because I told you the hinge had a date on it, and I want to show you what sat on either side of that date. When I was small, the hours between school and supper belonged to a boy to fill with doing, and there was always doing to be found. By the time I was finishing school, that had changed in one specific way. The front room had a television in it now. By 1960, there was a set in nearly 9 homes out of 10 in this country, and the afternoon that used to go to the workbench and the garden and the creek went to the cushion in front of the screen instead. I want to be fair, because I watched it too, and I loved a good Western as much as the next boy, but I can tell you what I saw with my own 2 eyes. The boys 5 and 10 years behind me did less with their hands, not because they were lesser boys, because the doing had stopped being the only thing on offer, and you cannot learn to bank a stove by watching a man do it on a screen. If any of this is landing in you, If you knew a boy like Hollis, or you are one, subscribe and sit with us. There are not many rooms left where a man can hear his own world remembered out loud instead of laughed at, and I open this one every week. By the time I was old enough to earn money of my own, this next one was already how a boy proved he was worth something. Number 12. He could cook a plain meal and mind a younger child while he did it, fry the eggs, boil the beans, get the biscuits to rise, keep a toddler off the hot stove and fed and out of the road, all at the same time. On a Saturday his mother was at work or laid up sick. A 10-year-old ran a household for an afternoon, and nobody called it remarkable. They called it Saturday. Number 11, he could run a paper route and keep his own books. Up before light, the canvas bag over one shoulder, every porch memorized, the collections every Friday with a little punch card, and at month's end, the figures had to come out right because the route was his and so was any shortfall. I had 86 customers at 12, and I knew to the penny what every one of them owed me. First money I ever earned, and the first time I understood that $1 is a thing a man has to account for. Number 10. He could splice a rope back into itself and rig a block and tackle to move what he could not begin to lift. A boy of 11, 90 pounds soaking wet, could raise an engine clean out of a car with rope and pulleys, and the patience to understand that mechanical advantage is just trading distance for force. He did not have the words for it. He had the rope, and he had the result swinging in the air in front of him. The three coming up are the ones that made a boy genuinely useful to grown men. Number 9, he could change a flat and patch a tire on the side of the road. Break the bead, find the hole, lay on the patch, and vulcanize it with a little clamp you actually lit on fire, and have the car rolling again with no telephone to call and nobody on the way to help him. I watched my father do it once, in the rain, on a county road with 3 of us kids in the back, and he never stopped whistling the whole time because to him a flat was not trouble, it was just a thing you fixed and went on. Number 8, he could get a dead motor running. Pull the plug and read what it told him, file the points, blow out a fuel line, coax a balky mower or an outboard or an old Model A back to life against the side of the barn. I knew 2 boys at 14, one could make an engine run and one could not. The one who could never once wanted for spending money or for the respect of older men clear into his old age. The other one called a man every single time and paid him and felt it. Number 7, he could lay a course of brick straight and patch a hole in the plaster so it did not show. Mix the mortar to the right wet feel, butter the brick, keep the line honest with a string, let it cure slow. The house was always half finished, and there was never money for a man to come do it, so a boy patched his own roof and pointed his own chimney, and he grew up understanding that the place you lived in was not something other people maintained for you. It was yours to keep standing, and that knowledge sat differently in a man than a rent receipt ever could. The 2 coming up are not about the hands at all, and they are the ones that surprised me to find I had put on this list. Number 6, he could write a clean letter in a real hand, sit down with a pen, and lay out a page that was legible, spelled right, and said its business plainly, then sign it in a script that was his own and steady. This was the skill that reached the people far off, the grandmother 2 states away, the cousin in the service, the girl he had to leave behind. A letter in a good hand from a young man told them exactly who he was becoming, in his own words and his own script. A boy now is known to the people far off by a face in a little glowing square, and not for long. Number 5, he could carry a poem or a piece of scripture in his head and say it out loud without a note in his hand. Stand up at a graveside, at a school program, at the supper table when an old man asked him to, and deliver it clear and unhurried and unafraid. My grandfather could recite for 20 minutes from memory things he had learned as a boy in a one-room school 60 years before, and he did it at every graveside our family ever stood around. The words stayed in him for life because he had put them there young. when a head holds on to things. Number 4 was the hardest thing we ever asked of a boy, and I will not soften it for you. On butcher morning, he helped put up the family's hog for the winter, and he did it without flinching because the family ate that season or it did not. I will not romanticize this one. It was cold and hard work, and it was hard on a tender boy in ways that went past the code, and I knew boys it made hard inside in a way that never quite wore off them. I remember my own first time, my breath showing in the gray air, an older man's hand on my shoulder, telling me to hold steady, be useful, and not look away. There was a real cost to teaching a child to do a hard thing calmly, and we did not always stop to count it honestly. But a boy also learned that the food on his plate was a life given up on purpose so that his could go on, and a boy who understood that in his hands, not just in his head, never wasted a scrap of anything again as long as he lived. That part, at least, was worth the knowing. Number 3. He could work a full day shoulder to shoulder with grown men and keep his end up. A barn raising, a hay harvest, a neighbor's roof torn off ahead of weather, the whole community turning out, and a boy of 11 was not standing to the side watching. He carried, he fetched, he drove nails, he kept the pace from first light to dark, and at the dinner the women laid out on plank tables, he ate with the men because he had earned the plate. A boy who could pull a man's share of a hard day got treated like one, and there is no praise a boy wants more than that. Which brings me to number 2, the one I told you to wait for, the one that turned a boy into a man before the calendar was willing to agree. Number 2, he could hold a real job and be depended on for it, not a chore and not an allowance his mother could stop when he sassed her, but a real position with a man outside his own family counting on him to show. The mill errand boy, the farmhand hired on for the season, the boy who minded the store counter while the owner ate his lunch in the back room. He showed up, he was handed money and tasks that genuinely mattered, and if he failed at them, a grown man was let down, not just a parent who would forgive him anyway. That is the thing that aged a boy up early, and it was not a ceremony, and it was not a birthday. It was being truly needed by somebody who was under no obligation to love him. Number 1, and by now you may have guessed, it is not a skill you could photograph. He could teach himself the next thing nobody had ever shown him. Set a boy from that world down in front of a problem he had never laid eyes on, a broken thing, a strange tool, a job with no instructions attached to it, and he would put his hands on it and not stand up again until it ran. The particular skills mattered, but they were never the prize. The prize was a boy who had fixed and built and figured out enough things in his short life that he simply assumed he could figure out the next one too. That assumption was the engine under all 30. The skills were only ever where a boy went to build it. So I will leave you with the only thing I know to do about any of it. If there is a boy anywhere in your life, a grandson, a neighbor's kid, the one always underfoot around your place, pick one thing off this list and show him this week. Not all 30, not a lesson, not a sit-down, nothing he would even recognize as being taught. Hand him the knife and let him whittle. Put his hands on the rope, let him bank the stove at night and find out in the cold morning whether he did it right. Let him be needed for one real thing and trusted to do it alone. That is how every boy on Hollis's road got it. One man at a time, one thing at a time, none of it ever written down in a book. You are the book now. You are the last man who still carries the pages, and there is a boy standing closer to you than you think.